People always say time heals everything, but nobody tells you what happens when time quietly brings your past back without asking if you are ready. My name is Mason Carter, and for the last 4 years, I've built a life so carefully that even I almost believed it had always looked this way. Every weekday morning began with unlocking the front door of Willow and Pine Books before the rest of downtown Portland had fully awakened. The old brass bell above the entrance chimed with the same comforting sound every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, followed by the familiar scent of paper, cedar shelves, and freshly brewed coffee drifting from the tiny cafe tucked into the back corner of the bookstore. It was never the biggest bookstore in the city, but that was exactly why I loved it. People did not come here because they were in a hurry. They wandered between shelves, asked for recommendations, sat by the windows reading for an hour without buying anything, and somehow always left smiling. I had started as a part-time bookseller after moving away from my hometown, telling myself it would only be temporary until I figured out my next step. Somehow temporary became 4 years. Eventually, the owner retired and trusted me enough to manage the entire store. I learned every regular customer's favorite author, every child's favorite picture book, and every elderly visitor's preferred reading chair beside the front window. Some afternoons, I caught myself smiling for no particular reason while rearranging displays or recommending novels to strangers. It was not the life I imagined when I was younger, but it was peaceful, and after everything that had happened years ago, peace felt like success. My apartment was only 3 blocks away, small but filled with books stacked on every available shelf. Plants that somehow survived despite my inconsistent watering schedule and sunlight that poured through the kitchen windows every morning. On weekends, I usually visited the local farmer's market, bought too many fresh flowers, and ended up giving half of them to neighbors because I never owned enough vases. My best friend, Sophie, constantly teased me for living like the main character in a cozy novel. She was probably right. One of these days, you're going to meet someone between the poetry section and the coffee machine, she joked one afternoon while helping me organize a shipment of new releases. I laughed without looking up from a stack of novels in my hands. I think books are less complicated than people. She gave me the kind of look that only longtime friends could manage. You used to believe both were worth the risk. I pretended not to hear the second half of that sentence because we both knew exactly who she was talking about. There were certain memories I had carefully folded away like old letters inside a drawer that rarely opened. Not because they hurt every day anymore, but because I had finally learned how to live without asking endless questions that no longer had answers. For years was a long time. Long enough for favorite songs to become nostalgic instead of painful. Long enough for familiar birthdays to pass without checking the calendar twice. Long enough to stop expecting impossible coincidences every time someone with similar hair walked past on a crowded sidewalk. That chapter of my life had ended quietly, without dramatic arguments or impossible betrayals. Sometimes 2 people simply chose different roads before either of them realized how far apart those roads would eventually lead. Around lunchtime, the bookstore became pleasantly busy as students searched for textbooks, parents browsed children's stories, and office workers escaped for a quick coffee during their lunch breaks. I loved watching complete strangers leave with books that might quietly change the way they looked at the world. Just before closing, an elderly customer named Mrs. Alvarez approached the register carrying a stack of picture books. "Would you donate these to the Children's Hospital Reading Program?" she asked with a warm smile. "My grandson has outgrown them, but another child might still need a little magic." I promised I would. After she left, I called the volunteer coordinator whose number was taped beside the office phone. She thanked me and casually mentioned they were unexpectedly short on volunteers for Saturday's reading session. "Would you be willing to help?" she asked. I glanced around the quiet bookstore. My weekend had been completely free. Of course, I answered without hesitation. I would be happy to. We settled on an afternoon shift, and after hanging up, I added the reminder to my calendar before returning to shelving books. It felt like another ordinary decision, the kind people made every day without giving it a second thought. I had absolutely no reason to believe that accepting one volunteer shift would quietly redirect everything I thought I understood about moving on. At closing time, I switched off the front lights, locked the bookstore door, and watched the reflection of the city shimmer across the rain-soaked sidewalk. Portland looked calm beneath the fading evening sky, and for the first time in years, I truly believed my life had found its steady rhythm. I did not know that somewhere else in the same city, another ordinary day was coming to an end for someone I had not seen in 4 years, and neither of us had the slightest idea that the next chapter of our lives was already waiting inside a place built to help people heal. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in a soft layer of gray clouds that seemed perfectly suited to Portland. A light drizzle had already painted the sidewalks with shimmering reflections by the time I finished locking the bookstore and walked toward the streetcar stop carrying 2 canvas bags filled with children's books. Mrs. Alvarez's donation had somehow doubled overnight after several regular customers overheard the conversation and quietly added their own favorite storybooks to the collection. That was one thing I loved about Willow and Pine books. Kindness had a habit of spreading without anyone asking it to. During the 20-minute ride across the city, I watched neighborhoods drift past the rain-speckled windows while families hurried beneath colorful umbrellas and cyclists navigated the damp streets with surprising confidence. I had volunteered at community events before, but never inside a hospital. I wondered whether reading stories could really make a difference for children facing difficult days. By the time I stepped off the streetcar, the rain had eased into a fine mist, leaving the sidewalks smelling fresh and the surrounding maple trees glowing with deep shades of green. Portland Children's Medical Center stood several stories tall, its modern glass entrance reflecting the cloudy morning sky instead of feeling cold or intimidating. Colorful murals covered the outside walls, turning what could have been an ordinary hospital into a place that felt welcoming long before anyone walked through the front doors. Inside, volunteers wearing bright blue badges greeted visitors with warm smiles, while children laughed somewhere beyond the main lobby. The sound surprised me. I had expected quiet hallways filled with worry. Instead, I found colorful artwork, bookshelves tucked into waiting areas, paper butterflies hanging from the ceiling, and nurses chatting gently with families as though they were welcoming neighbors instead of patients. A volunteer coordinator named Rebecca met me near the information desk. She thanked me for bringing the books, handed me a visitor badge, and explained that the reading room was located in the pediatric rehabilitation wing. The children love story time, she said while leading me through a long hallway painted with forests, mountains, and friendly woodland animals. Sometimes reading helps them forget they are in a hospital, even if it is only for a little while. I smiled. I think books have always been good at doing that. We passed several therapy rooms where children practiced walking with colorful balance equipment while therapists encouraged them with patient smiles and cheerful voices. Every corner of the building seemed designed to replace fear with hope. It was impossible not to admire the people who work there every day. Rebecca stopped outside a bright reading room filled with oversized beanbags, shelves of picture books, puzzles, and large windows overlooking a peaceful garden. "You can start arranging the books while I check on today's schedule," she said before disappearing around the corner. I placed the donated books onto a wooden cart and began organizing them by age group, humming quietly to myself as I worked. The room smelled faintly of crayons, fresh paint, and coffee drifting from a nearby staff lounge. It reminded me more of a community library than a hospital. After a few minutes, I noticed I was missing a box from the donation list. Assuming I had left it near the entrance, I stepped back into the hallway and started retracing my path. Turning one corner, I nearly collided with someone carrying a stack of therapy folders. We both stopped instantly. The folders slipped slightly in his hands, but never fell. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of us moved. The hallway around us continued exactly as before. Nurses walked past. A little girl laughed somewhere behind us. An elevator door opened and closed. Yet every ordinary sound seemed impossibly far away. Standing only a few feet from me was Logan Bennett. His dark blonde hair was slightly shorter than I remembered, and faint lines near his warm hazel eyes hinted at years spent smiling patiently at children who needed encouragement. He wore navy medical scrubs beneath a light gray zip-up jacket, his identification badge resting against his chest. He looked older, steadier, somehow even kinder than the young man I had once known. His expression mirrored my own surprise so perfectly that for a moment it almost felt unreal. "Mason," he asked softly, as though saying my name too loudly might cause the moment to disappear. I managed a small nod before finding my voice. Lovon. The greeting lasted barely 2 words, yet it carried 4 years of unanswered questions neither of us expected to face on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. We simply looked at each other, not with anger or regret, but with the quiet disbelief reserved for moments life never warns you about. Finally, Rebecca appeared from the reading room, carrying a clipboard. "Perfect," she said brightly, completely unaware of the history standing in front of her. "You have already met one of our pediatric physical therapists. Logan volunteers with Storytime whenever his schedule allows." Logan glanced toward Rebecca before looking back at me with the faintest, almost uncertain smile. "Looks like we're working together today." I felt my heartbeat quicken for reasons I could not explain, then forced myself to return a polite smile. "Looks like we are." Neither of us knew what the afternoon would bring, but as we walked side by side toward the reading room filled with waiting children, I could not shake the strange feeling that the city had quietly placed us in exactly the place we had never expected to see each other again. The reading room slowly filled with children carrying blankets, stuffed animals, and the unmistakable excitement that only story time could create. Any nervousness I had felt moments earlier faded as soon as a little boy wearing oversized dinosaur socks tugged gently on my sleeve and asked if I was the person bringing the new books. I smiled and knelt beside him, opening one of the canvas bags so he could peek inside. His eyes widened with genuine delight. "There are dragons," he whispered as though he had discovered buried treasure. "There are definitely dragons," I replied. Within minutes, the room buzzed with quiet conversations as children searched for colorful covers while parents settled into comfortable chairs along the walls. Rebecca introduced me as the volunteer from Willow and Pine Books before asking Logan to help organize the younger children into small reading circles. Watching him work was strangely comforting. He moved through the room with calm confidence, greeting every child by name, crouching to eye level during conversations, celebrating tiny victories that many adults might never notice. One little girl proudly showed him that she had taken 6 careful steps without holding anyone's hand, and Logan reacted as though she had just won an Olympic medal. The smile on her face was impossible to ignore. It suddenly became very clear why he had chosen this profession. "You can start whenever you are ready," Rebecca whispered before stepping aside. I selected a picture book about an adventurous fox exploring the Pacific Northwest and gathered 6 children around a colorful rug decorated with stars and clouds. At first, they listened quietly, but before long they interrupted every few pages with thoughtful questions, imaginative theories, and wonderfully unexpected observations. One insisted the fox needed a backpack filled entirely with cookies. Another believed the talking owl was secretly the smartest character in the whole forest. Their creativity transformed the story into something much bigger than the words printed on the page. Every time laughter filled the room, I caught myself forgetting that we were inside a hospital at all. Between reading sessions, Logan joined my group, carrying a stack of coloring pages featuring the same woodland characters. "I thought these might help continue the adventure," he said, placing them beside the children. One energetic boy immediately handed me a green crayon. "You have to color too," he declared with absolute certainty. I laughed. "Do I get choice?" "No," he answered proudly. Logan chuckled beside me. He usually does not leave much room for negotiation. For the next 20 minutes, we both sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring imaginary forests while children enthusiastically debated whether purple squirrels should exist. It was such an ordinary, joyful moment that I almost forgot how unexpected the afternoon had become. During a short break, Rebecca asked Logan to show me the hospital garden where families often gathered after therapy sessions. We stepped outside through wide glass doors into a peaceful courtyard filled with flowers, wooden benches, and winding stone paths. Wind chimes swayed gently beneath a covered gazebo, while butterflies drifted lazily between blooming lavender bushes. It felt less like part of a medical center and more like a quiet neighborhood park. I come out here whenever the day gets overwhelming, Logan admitted as we walked slowly beside a small fountain. It reminds everyone that healing does not always happen inside treatment rooms. I nodded, watching two young brothers race toy boats across the fountain's shallow water. The bookstore feels like that sometimes, I said. People think they come looking for novels, but often they're really searching for a place to breathe. Logan smiled softly. That sounded exactly like you. His words caught me by surprise. Exactly like me? You always believed places could make people feel safe. He looked toward the children playing nearby before continuing. I do not think that part of you ever changed. A comfortable silence settled between us. Not awkward, simply unfamiliar after so many years apart. We were no longer the uncertain young men who had once struggled to imagine the future. Life had quietly reshaped us into people who understood the value of patience, routine, and showing up for others. As we returned toward the reading room, we passed a wall covered with photographs donated by former patients and their families. Smiling faces filled every frame, each picture celebrating milestones that must have once seemed impossible. I stopped for a moment to admire them. Do you ever get used to working here? I asked. Logan followed my gaze. Not really. He smiled thoughtfully. Every child teaches me something different. Some remind me to be brave. Others remind me to slow down. Most remind me that hope usually arrives in very ordinary moments. Before I could answer, the little boy with the dinosaur socks came running toward us carrying the dragon book against his chest. Can you both read the next one together? He asked hopefully. Logan glanced at me with an uncertain smile that carried just enough warmth to make the question feel bigger than the child intended. I smiled back before answering for both of us. I think we can do that. As we walked side by side into the reading room once again, surrounded by children's laughter and colorful stories, it became increasingly difficult to believe that only a few hours earlier I had considered this nothing more than another volunteer shift. Somehow, without either of us trying, the distance created by 4 years had already begun to feel a little smaller. By the time the afternoon reading session came to an end, I realized I had not checked my phone once in nearly 4 hours. That alone felt unusual. My weekends usually disappeared beneath bookstore inventory reports, customer emails, or reminders about upcoming author events. Instead, I had spent the day surrounded by children's laughter, colorful picture books, and conversations that somehow made the entire hospital feel brighter than the cloudy sky outside. As families slowly made their way home, several children waved enthusiastically from wheelchairs, therapy walkers, and parents' arms, each proudly carrying a book they had chosen to keep. Watching them leave, I understood why volunteers kept coming back. It was impossible not to. Rebecca gathered everyone near the reading room entrance and thanked the staff and volunteers for another successful afternoon. Before people began heading home, she made one final announcement. Next Saturday is our annual Family Hope Festival, she explained. We will transform the rehabilitation garden into a giant outdoor story fair with games, live music, and reading stations. We could really use extra hands setting everything up throughout the week. Before I had time to think, I heard myself say, I would love to help. Across the room, Logan glanced toward me with a quiet smile that somehow felt both familiar and completely new. As everyone packed away books and decorations, Rebecca handed each volunteer a small schedule. Mine happened to match Logan's almost perfectly. Looks like we will be seeing each other quite a bit this week, he said while folding the paper and slipping it into his jacket pocket. Looks that way, I answered, surprised by how natural the conversation felt now compared with the awkward silence that had greeted us only hours earlier. We walked toward the hospital cafe together, neither of us seeming eager to rush back into the rain. The cafeteria overlooked the therapy garden through enormous windows, and the scent of tomato soup, fresh bread, and coffee filled the warm space. We chose a quiet table near the glass where children chased colorful pinwheels outside despite the light drizzle. Do you still recommend books? To complete strangers? Logan asked while stirring his coffee. I laughed softly. Every single day. Sometimes they listen. And sometimes they come back a week later asking for another recommendation because I accidentally introduced them to an author they could not stop reading. He smiled. That sounds exactly like something you would enjoy. What about you? I asked. Do the children always convince you to play every game they invent? He chuckled. More often than I would admit. Yesterday, I spent 20 minutes pretending to lose a dinosaur treasure hunt because one little boy insisted the therapist could never win. We both laughed, and for the first time since meeting again, the laughter carried no hesitation. It sounded effortless. By the time we finished eating, heavy rain had returned, falling so steadily that the hospital parking lot disappeared behind a curtain of silver. Rebecca hurried into the cafe, looking mildly concerned. The roads near the river are flooding, she explained. Several staff members who live across town are staying overnight in the family residence until the weather clears. We have plenty of empty rooms if either of you cannot get home safely. I checked the weather alerts on my phone. Streetcar service had already been suspended for the evening because of standing water. Logan glanced at the screen and sighed. Looks like driving is not a great idea either. Rebecca smiled reassuringly. The residence is comfortable. It is mostly used by volunteers and visiting families. We will figure everything out in the morning. An hour later, we carried small, overnight bags the hospital kept available for unexpected situations into one of the guest rooms. The space was simple but welcoming, with warm lighting, a small sofa, a reading lamp, and one large bed that had been prepared for emergency family stays. Rebecca apologized immediately. I'm sorry. Every other room is occupied tonight because of the weather. Housekeeping can bring extra blankets if you need them. Logan looked toward the sofa and laughed quietly. I do not think either of us is sleeping on that. I smiled in agreement. It is probably shorter than both of us. We accepted the extra blankets, changed into comfortable hospital-provided sleepwear, and agreed to share the bed in the most practical way possible, leaving a folded blanket between us almost out of instinct. Rain tapped steadily against the window while distant thunder rolled gently across the city. The room remained peaceful, filled only with soft lamplight and the occasional sound of cars passing through wet streets below. We lay facing the ceiling, careful, not to disturb the quiet. After several minutes, Logan spoke softly. It is strange. What is? I asked. 4 years felt impossibly long until today. Now it almost feels like someone simply paused the conversation for a while. I turned slightly toward him. I was thinking something similar. Neither of us tried to force deeper questions or reopen old memories before we were ready. Instead, we talked about favorite authors, embarrassing high school jobs, the best coffee in Portland, and whether children or adults had better imaginations. Somewhere between shared laughter and comfortable silence, the unfamiliar awkwardness disappeared completely. Outside, the rain continued washing the city clean, while inside the little guest room, two people who had once believed they would never meet again quietly discovered that sometimes trust returns long before answers do. Morning arrived with clear skies and the unmistakable smell of rain-soaked trees drifting through the slightly open window of the hospital residence. I woke a few minutes before my alarm, momentarily forgetting where I was until I noticed the folded blanket still resting between Logan and me. He was already awake, sitting quietly in the chair beside the window with a paperback novel in his hands and a paper cup of coffee balanced on the table next to him. When he noticed I was awake, he smiled with the same calm expression I had seen all afternoon around the children. I figured you would want coffee before facing the outside world again, he said, holding up the extra cup. I laughed softly as I accepted it. You still remember that I cannot function without it. Some things are surprisingly easy to remember, he replied. We left the residence together after breakfast, walking through the hospital courtyard where yesterday's rain had left tiny drops of water clinging to every flower. Volunteers were already unloading colorful tents, folding tables, and stacks of children's books for the upcoming Family Hope Festival. Rebecca waved us over before either of us had a chance to disappear into separate tasks. Perfect timing, she said. The reading garden needs decorating, and someone has to organize the... New book donations. I was hoping the two of you would not mind working together again. Logan looked at me with an amused grin. I think she has already decided for us. I smiled. It certainly seems that way. The morning passed quickly. We strung paper lanterns between garden arches, carried boxes of picture books into the outdoor reading tent, and arranged colorful cushions beneath a large maple tree where story time would take place. Every so often, children stopped to inspect our progress, offering enthusiastic opinions about balloon colors or insisting that dragon books deserve their own special shelf. Their excitement was contagious. At one point, a little girl carefully handed Logan a drawing of two smiling stick figures standing beneath a rainbow. "That is you in the book, man," she announced proudly before skipping away toward her mother. Logan laughed while studying the picture. "Apparently, I have been promoted. I should be honored to receive such an official title," I replied. He folded the drawing carefully instead of throwing it away and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "These are the things you keep forever," he said quietly. His words reminded me of the countless bookmarks, handwritten notes, and children's thank you cards tucked inside the office drawer at the bookstore. Some things only looked small until you realized how impossible they were to replace. Around lunchtime, we escaped the busy courtyard and walked to a quiet bench overlooking the rehabilitation garden with sandwiches from the hospital cafe. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender across the path while a therapist encouraged a young patient taking determined steps between colorful cones. We watched in comfortable silence until Logan spoke. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if you had stayed?" I looked down at my sandwich for a moment before answering honestly. I used to wonder all the time. Eventually I stopped because I thought it would never matter. He nodded slowly. I asked myself the same question. There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet reflection. "When I left for graduate school," he continued, "I kept telling myself we would figure everything out after graduation. Then life kept moving faster than either of us expected. I remembered those final months before everything changed. We had both been chasing opportunities, convinced there would always be more time later. Later simply arrived sooner than we imagined. I never blamed you," I admitted softly. "I blamed the timing." Logan looked at me with visible surprise before letting out a slow breath. "I spent 4 years believing you hated me for leaving." I shook my head. I was hurt. That is different. Another long silence settled between us. But unlike years ago, neither of us rushed to fill it with assumptions. We had both learned that silence could simply mean someone was thinking. Before returning to work, Logan reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded the little girl's drawing one more time. He smiled before handing it to me. "You keep it." I looked at him in confusion. "Why?" "Because you're the one who taught me years ago that stories deserve to be saved." I accepted the drawing carefully, realizing it was not really about two stick figures beneath a rainbow. It was about the unexpected way ordinary moments quietly became memories worth protecting. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the maple leaves and children's laughter echoed across the garden, I began to understand that the 4 years between us had not erased what mattered most. They had simply given both of us enough time to become the kind of people who finally knew how to listen before drawing conclusions. The days leading up to the Family Hope Festival settled into a gentle rhythm that somehow felt both new and strangely familiar. Every morning, I opened Willow and Pine books, helped customers find stories that matched their moods, and packed another box of donated books before walking across the city to the hospital after lunch. The routine was simple, yet I found myself looking forward to every afternoon more than I wanted to admit. It was not because the work was easy. Decorating reading corners, organizing activities, and carrying supplies across the hospital grounds could be exhausting. It was because every day seemed to offer another quiet reminder that ordinary moments often mattered the most. By Tuesday afternoon, the rehabilitation garden had begun transforming into something magical. Bright banners stretched between maple trees, handmade paper stars hung above the reading area, and colorful wooden signs pointed children toward different storytelling stations. Logan stood on a small ladder fastening strands of warm string lights around a gazebo, while I sorted stacks of picture books on a low wooden shelves. "Does this look straight to you?" he called down. I stepped back several feet, pretending to study the lights with exaggerated seriousness. "A little to the left." He adjusted them. "Now, perfect." He climbed down, folded the ladder, and smiled. "You still notice details nobody else sees." "Occupational habit," I replied. "Bookshelves teach you that one crooked thing somehow makes the entire room feel different." He laughed. "I suppose therapy teaches the same lesson." We spent the next hour arranging beanbags beneath the trees while a group of young patients insisted on helping despite contributing more enthusiasm than organization. One little girl proudly placed every blue cushion into the same corner because blue was her favorite color. Rather than correcting her, Logan quietly rearranged the remaining cushions around hers so the entire space looked intentional. I watched the children beam with pride when they stepped back to admire their work. "You could have changed everything," I whispered after they wandered away. He shrugged. "Sometimes people do not need perfection. They just need to know their effort mattered." His answer stayed with me long after we finished. Later that afternoon, Rebecca stopped by carrying several envelopes. "Good news," she announced. The festival attracted a lot of attention online. We also received a grant for expanding the reading program. Everyone celebrated the announcement, but she quickly turned toward me with another envelope. "There is something for you as well." Inside was a formal invitation from a national independent bookstore network. They wanted me to interview for the position of regional creative director, overseeing multiple bookstores throughout the Pacific Northwest. The opportunity was extraordinary. It meant higher pay, greater responsibility, and a chance to shape literacy programs across several cities. Rebecca congratulated me warmly before hurrying off to another meeting. I stared at the letter for several quiet moments. Logan noticed immediately. "That looks important." I handed him the invitation. He read it carefully before smiling with genuine pride. "Mason, this is incredible." "It is," I admitted, though my voice lacked the excitement I expected. "You worked hard for this," he said. "You should be proud." "I am." I looked around the garden where volunteers were laughing while hanging colorful decorations, where children practiced reading aloud beneath the trees, and where the little girl in the blue jacket continued proudly arranging cushions no one intended to move. I just was not expecting to have another decision to make. Logan folded the letter carefully before returning it. "Life has a funny sense of timing." I smiled. Apparently it does. We continued working until sunset painted the hospital windows with warm shades of gold. Before leaving, Logan suggested stopping at a small neighborhood food truck that parked outside the hospital every Tuesday evening. We ordered grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup before sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the city skyline. Office lights flickered on one building at a time, while bicycles rolled quietly along the nearby river path. "Can I ask you something?" Logan said after a while. "Of course." He looked down at the paper cup, warming his hands. "When you left 4 years ago, did you ever think we would meet again?" I answered honestly. "Sometimes. Usually in airports, grocery stores, or random coffee shops. Never here." He smiled softly. "Neither did I." Another comfortable silence followed, the kind that no longer felt empty, the kind shared by people who had finally stopped pretending they understood every answer. As we finished dinner, my phone vibrated with a new email confirming the interview date for the bookstore position. I looked at the notification before slipping the phone back into my pocket without opening it. Logan noticed, but chose not to ask. Instead, he stood and offered me the last bite of his grilled cheese sandwich because he remembered I always stole it years ago. I laughed, accepted it without hesitation, and realized that some of the smallest gestures could quietly bridge distances that once seemed impossible. Walking home beneath Portland's glowing streetlights, I found myself thinking less about promotions or job titles and more about how unexpectedly peaceful life had become whenever I stopped measuring success by where I was going and started appreciating the people walking beside me. Wednesday arrived with bright sunshine spilling across Portland after nearly a week of rain, and the entire city seemed lighter because of it. By the time I finished arranging the bookstore display featuring children's classics, 3 regular customers had already asked whether I would be volunteering at the Family Hope Festival again this weekend. News traveled surprisingly fast whenever kindness was involved. Mrs. Alvarez even dropped off another box of picture books, along with homemade blueberry muffins for the volunteers. "Stories and muffins always make difficult days easier," she said with a wink before disappearing into the mystery section. I packed everything into my car after closing the bookstore and drove toward the hospital with the windows rolled down, letting the cool spring air carry away the last traces of a busy workday. When I reached the rehabilitation garden, the transformation was almost complete. Bright banners fluttered gently between the maple trees. Colorful paper lanterns swayed overhead, and the reading tent looked ready to welcome dozens of families. Logan was helping a little boy carefully paint a wooden sign that read "Adventure starts here." The child held the paintbrush with complete concentration, while Logan patiently steadied the board with one hand. Every time the boy finished another letter, Logan celebrated as though they had completed a masterpiece. I stood quietly for a moment before he noticed me. "Perfect timing," he called with an easy smile. "We have one last project." He handed me a folded blueprint for the festival layout. "Rebecca wants a quiet reading corner near the butterfly garden, but she cannot decide where the bookshelves should go." We walked together through the garden, discussing different arrangements, occasionally moving chairs or benches a few inches to test the space. It felt oddly similar to redesigning a bookstore, except this time every decision centered around making children feel comfortable instead of increasing sales. We finally settled on placing the shelves beneath a flowering dogwood tree where soft afternoon light filtered through the branches. "There," I said after stepping back to admire the view. "Now it feels welcoming." Logan looked around before nodding. "You always know how to make a place invite people in." His compliment lingered in my thoughts long after we returned the tools. Later that afternoon, the volunteer team gathered to test the festival activities. One station involved children searching for hidden storybook characters placed throughout the garden. Rebecca insisted every volunteer participate so they could identify any problems before Saturday. Within minutes, the entire staff scattered through the pathways pretending to hunt for cardboard dragons, talking rabbits, and tiny wooden owls hidden among flower beds. Logan and I accidentally reached the same hidden fox tucked behind a bench at exactly the same time. We laughed as our hands paused only inches apart before either of us picked it up. "Looks like a tie," he said. "I will happily share the victory," I replied. Nearby, several nurses applauded dramatically as though we had accomplished something extraordinary, making everyone laugh even harder. The simple game reminded me how rarely adults gave themselves permission to enjoy ordinary moments without worrying how they looked. As evening settled over the garden, Rebecca thanked everyone before announcing one final piece of news. "The local television station will be covering the festival on Saturday," she explained. "They would also like to interview Mason about the bookstore partnership and Logan about the rehabilitation reading program." I blinked in surprise. Public interviews had never been my favorite part of managing the bookstore. Logan smiled knowingly. "You still hate cameras?" "Very much." "Do not worry," he said with a grin. "The children will probably steal all the attention." We left the hospital together as the sky slowly shifted from soft blue to shades of orange and pink. Instead of heading straight home, we wandered through a nearby riverside park where families walked their dogs. Musicians played acoustic guitars beneath the trees, and food vendors prepared evening snacks. We bought 2 lemonades and sat on a bench overlooking the water while ducks drifted lazily across the river. The peaceful silence between us no longer needed to be filled with careful conversation. Finally, Logan spoke. "There is something I never told you." I turned toward him, waiting quietly. "When we stopped talking 4 years ago, I almost came back 3 different times." I looked at him in surprise, but remained silent. Each time I convinced myself you deserve someone whose future was not so uncertain. I thought staying away was the kinder choice. I let those words settle before answering. "You know what the strangest part is?" He looked at me. "I spent those same years believing you had already decided I was not worth coming back for." Neither of us laughed this time. We simply sat together watching the river flow beneath the fading sunset, both realizing how many years have been shaped by assumptions neither of us had ever spoken aloud. Logan slowly exhaled before offering a quiet smile, filled with equal parts regret and relief. We were both trying to protect each other. I nodded gently, and somehow we both ended up protecting ourselves from the wrong thing. The city lights began reflecting across the water as evening settled around us. And for the first time since we met again, it felt as though the conversation we should have had years ago had finally begun. Saturday arrived beneath a sky so clear that it seemed impossible to believe heavy rain had filled the streets only a few days earlier. By 8 o'clock, the rehabilitation garden had transformed into a place overflowing with color, laughter, and quiet hope. Families wandered between rows of bright tents while volunteers carried baskets of books. Musicians tuned acoustic guitars near the gazebo, and the scent of fresh popcorn mixed with blooming lavender drifting through the warm morning air. Children raced toward the reading stations with handmade maps clutched in their hands, determined to collect every story stamp before the afternoon ended. Watching the festival come to life felt strangely emotional because every banner, every bookshelf, and every comfortable reading corner reminded me of the countless ordinary afternoons that had quietly brought all of us together. Logan met me near the entrance, carrying 2 cups of coffee exactly the way he had every morning that week. Festival survival kit, he joked while handing one to me. I was hoping it included muffins too, I replied. He laughed. Mrs. Alvarez already delivered 3 boxes. Somehow that answer made perfect sense. Before long, we found ourselves welcoming families together, directing children toward activities, answering questions about books, and encouraging nervous young readers who hesitated before opening the first page. The television crew arrived shortly after 10 o'clock, but the cameras quickly became almost invisible beside the energy of the children. During the interview, I spoke about how stories gave people safe places to imagine brighter futures, while Logan explained that reading often helped children feel brave enough to face difficult therapy sessions. Neither of us rehearsed our answers, yet they seemed to fit together naturally, as though we had been finishing each other's thoughts for much longer than a week. When the interview ended, the reporter smiled warmly. "You two make an incredible team." Logan glanced toward me before answering with an easy grin. "We have had a little practice." The afternoon unfolded into dozens of beautiful little moments that no camera could fully capture. A shy girl who had refused to speak during her first therapy appointment proudly read an entire picture book aloud beneath the dogwood tree. The little boy with dinosaur socks insisted on introducing me as the official dragon expert to every family who visited the reading tent. Rebecca wiped away quiet tears after seeing children and parents filling every chair in the garden. More than once I caught Logan watching the festival with the same expression I had seen when children reached small milestones during therapy, not pride in himself, but gratitude for witnessing someone else's happiness. Late in the afternoon, the crowd slowly thinned, leaving volunteers to tidy the garden while families headed home carrying books, balloons, and handmade crafts. Rebecca gathered everyone together and thanked us for making the event the most successful Family Hope Festival the hospital had ever hosted. She announced that the grant received earlier in the week would officially fund a permanent reading program inside the rehabilitation wing. Applause filled the garden, but before it faded, she turned toward Logan. "Your training fellowship in Boston has officially been approved as well. Congratulations." Everyone cheered again, while Logan smiled politely, though I noticed something thoughtful behind his expression. My own smile remained, yet a quiet heaviness settled somewhere beneath it. Until that moment, the fellowship had simply been an opportunity mentioned in passing. Hearing that it had become real somehow changed everything. A little later, we carried folding chairs back into storage together without saying very much. Finally, I broke the silence. "Boston is an incredible opportunity." Logan nodded slowly. "It is. You always wanted to specialize in pediatric rehabilitation." "I still do." He paused before looking at me. "Your interview is next week." I slipped my hands into my jacket pockets. It is. We both smiled, but neither of us pretended the conversation was easy. The strange part was that this time, neither of us wanted to repeat the mistakes of 4 years ago. We walked out of the hospital as the sun began sinking behind the skyline, choosing the longer route along the river instead of heading directly home. Street musicians filled the waterfront with quiet melodies, while cyclists passed beneath rows of glowing lights. After several peaceful minutes, Logan stopped near a railing overlooking the water. "Can we promise each other something?" he asked. "Anything." He rested his elbows lightly against the railing. No disappearing this time. No deciding what the other person needs without asking. "Whatever happens with Boston or your interview, we talk first." I looked out across the river where the evening light shimmered gently across the current. For years earlier, I would have answered with uncertainty because I believed protecting someone sometimes meant walking away. Now the answer felt remarkably simple. I turned back toward him and smiled. "I promise." He extended his hand, not as a dramatic gesture, but as the quiet beginning of an agreement built on honesty instead of assumptions. I shook it, and both of us laughed because the promise somehow felt far more meaningful than either of us expected. As we continued walking beneath the glowing streetlights, my phone vibrated with a new email reminding me to confirm my interview attendance by the following morning. Almost at the same moment, Logan's phone chimed with travel information for Boston. Neither of us opened the messages right away. Instead, we kept walking side by side, allowing the peaceful rhythm of the evening to remind us that whatever decisions waited ahead, we would finally face them by speaking to each other instead of letting silence choose for us. 1 year later, the first thing visitors noticed when they stepped through the doors of the new Harbor Pages Reading Center inside Portland Children's Medical Center was not the rows of colorful books or the bright murals covering the walls. It was the sound of laughter. Every afternoon, children gathered beneath the large windows with picture books balanced on their knees, while volunteers, parents, therapists, and nurses filled the room with gentle conversations that made the hospital feel more like a neighborhood library than a place where people came because life had become difficult. Sometimes healing looked like advanced medicine. Other times it looked like a child forgetting to be afraid because someone had just read them a wonderful story. Willow and Pine Books had become the official community partner for the program after my interview led to an unexpected conversation rather than the promotion I originally imagined. Instead of accepting the regional creative director position that would have required constant travel across several states, I proposed creating a permanent partnership between independent bookstores and children's hospitals throughout the city. The organization loved the idea enough to create a brand new role that allowed me to remain in Portland while expanding literacy programs locally. Success arrived in a form I had never expected because, for the first time in my life, I had stopped chasing titles and started building something that genuinely reflected the person I wanted to become. Logan's fellowship turned out differently than either of us had feared as well. Boston still welcomed him for advanced pediatric rehabilitation training, but the program approved a flexible schedule combining several intensive learning sessions with remote collaboration throughout the year. It meant occasional travel instead of a permanent move. More importantly, it meant neither of us had to choose between meaningful work and the people who gave that work purpose. We kept the promise we made beside the river months earlier. Every difficult decision became a conversation instead of a silent assumption. Every opportunity became something we explored together instead of separately. On most mornings, Logan stopped by the bookstore before heading to the hospital, carrying 2 cups of coffee and pretending he only needed to borrow another novel. I always teased him because he returned books faster than anyone I had ever met. He insisted working with children made him an efficient reader. I suspected he simply enjoyed having an excuse to visit every morning. Mrs. Alvarez never stopped pretending to be surprised whenever she found us talking beside the front display. Sophie claimed she had predicted everything from the beginning and reminded me of her old joke about meeting someone between the poetry section and the coffee machine. I finally admitted she had been closer to the truth than either of us realized. One sunny Saturday, the Family Hope Festival returned to the rehabilitation garden, even larger than before. Hundreds of families wandered beneath colorful banners while local musicians played cheerful songs and volunteers handed out bookmarks decorated by young patients. The little boy with dinosaur socks proudly announced that he had graduated to chapter books, while the shy girl who once struggled to read aloud confidently volunteered to help younger children sound out difficult words. Watching them grow somehow made every ordinary afternoon we had spent together feel even more meaningful. Rebecca gathered everyone for a group photograph beneath the flowering dogwood tree where we had built the first outdoor reading corner. As the photographer counted down, Logan quietly leaned closer and whispered, "Do you know what my favorite part of this whole place is?" I smiled without looking away from the camera. "The books." He shook his head. "The conversations that happened because of them." The shutter clicked just as we both laughed. Later that evening, after the festival ended and the last families had gone home carrying balloons, books, and happy memories, Logan and I walked through the now quiet garden collecting forgotten blankets and empty lemonade cups. The lanterns overhead glowed softly as twilight settled across the city. We paused beneath the same dogwood tree where children had spent the afternoon reading stories together. "Funny," I said quietly. "A year ago, I thought volunteering here would simply fill one free Saturday." Logan smiled gently. "Instead, it changed both of our lives." I nodded, not because we found our way back to the past. He looked at me with the same calm warmth I had first noticed in the therapy hallway. Because we finally learned how to build a future. We stood there for another peaceful moment while a cool evening breeze carried the scent of lavender through the nearly empty garden. Looking back now, I no longer believe life is shaped by extraordinary coincidences alone. More often it changes because we choose kindness during ordinary afternoons, honesty during uncomfortable conversations, and courage when silence seems easier. For years apart taught us who we were alone. Meeting again taught us who we could become together. If there is one lesson this journey left with me, it is that second. Chances rarely ask us to relive yesterday. They quietly invite us to become better people today, trusting that when two hearts have truly grown, even the most unexpected reunion can become the beginning of a life filled with hope, purpose, and the simple joy of walking forward side by side.